So, um, I am branching out in ways that I never thought possible with technology and stuff. Wow. Um, I don't do a lot of technology. Those of you who really know me know that because I don't know. I'm stuck in medieval times, and I'm afraid that they're going to show up and burn me. Any, anyway, so because of COVID-19 and everything else, I'm exceptionally bored. I'm sure you're exceptionally bored. And again, anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge reader. So I thought what I would do is maybe make a few book recommendations for you guys. Um, I have kind of weird tastes in books. I'm all over the place. There's fantasy, there's sci-fi, some sci-fi, not so much. I read teen books, I read history books, I read all kinds of strange stuff. So I just figured maybe I would give you guys a little bit of a rundown. I tried to pick stuff that you can probably get. I tried to pick stuff that's not indie, not because I have a problem with indie books, but they do tend to be more difficult to obtain during situations like this. And I say that as though there have been situations like this, which really not so much. But anyway, point being, I got a selection of books here. I figured I would give it a shot and see how this goes. And if you like this, let me know, and I will put some more up. And if you don't like this, well, be nice to me anyway, because I did something that I've never done. So, anyway, so here we go. I'll give it a start. The first one I want to recommend, and I know these are all flipped, and I really don't know how to fix that, but so is Thornjack. It's by Catherine Harbour. It's a Night and Nothing novel, which you can kind of see right here, and that means that it's the first of a, not quartet. There's three of these. And I got this when it came out a few years ago. I think I bought it immediately because it was just so pretty. Honestly, that's really all it was that it was pretty, and there were fairies in it, and that was all it took. And it's a really interesting book. It's very poetic. It's very beautiful. There's a lot of really amazing imagery. Not so much on the plot or the character development. That's not why you read this. You read this because it's gorgeous. And I wish I could say that changes to the other three, and that's not true. But if you love the artistic imagery and the thought process that goes into that, and you're a very visual person, like you're very mentally acute in picturing things that you're reading, these are kind of a breathtaking place to go, especially when you're stuck in your house. What is it about? As I said, it's about the fairy court, and the main character is Seraphina Sullivan, and the premise is that she has moved to, I guess, upstate New York, to a college town, and the college is, of course, controlled by the fairy court, which is fairly obvious from the get-go. I'm not really giving you any spoilers there. After her sister killed herself. And we find out through the course of the book, like, that her sister was involved with the Fae, and different things happened. The Fae in these books are not the magical fairy princesses that, are in little kid stories. These are more the Fae kind of in the Irish legends, and the things that want to eat you and that live under hills and lure you to your death. But so this was a really good dark fantasy, poetic art kind of series. So I really do recommend those. The next one that I'm going to recommend, I don't always have the best copies of these, but the next one that I'm going to recommend is Blackout by Connie Willis. My copy is actually an old library book, which I do recommend. Buy old library books. They need homes too. So anyway, Blackout is a really unique concept. It's technically sci-fi, it's technically futuristic, but it's something that a non-sci-fi reader, because I'm not frequently a sci-fi reader, could really enjoy as well. It's set, I don't remember exactly when it's set, 2060 in Oxford in England, and anthropological / history students are capable now of going back in time, and it's about the faculty and all the, if you've gone to a college, obviously there's a lot of snafus and things like that, and so this captures this very well. But instead of screwing up your transcript, they screw up your drop, and your drop is into the Dunkirk situation, or Hannibal's march, something like that. And so this one focuses very much on World War II, and it's called Blackout because it talks about the Blitz. Not a lot of people actually, I don't remember covering this a lot in history, and you have to understand, I took like a stupid amount of history courses in college. So 30,000 people, I think it is, died in the Blitz in London, and we don't talk about it a lot. This is a jump back to that. They talk about being a historian and an anthropologist in that situation, and I'm really sorry my light just went out. There we go. So that was a really interesting take and a really interesting way of looking at it, and they talk about like everything kind of breaking down, the system kind of screwing up. There being these very important points in history that are kind of tipping points where you really can't go to, and of course they messed that up because otherwise there's just it's not enough just to be an interesting historical book. We have to have some sort of crisis as well. So this was really good. I really recommend it. I recommend a lot of her books, really. If you get into her, I wouldn't really say there's anything in her catalog that I would say steer away from. So the next one I'm going to recommend is The Fifth Petal. I don't know if you can see that, The Fifth Petal. I'm going to totally slaughter this woman's name. I believe it's pronounced Brenonia Berry. I could be wrong. Miss Berry, if for some amazing reason you see this and I said your name wrong, I do apologize. This one was good. This one was not my usual fare. It's set in Salem, Massachusetts, and it has to do with murders. There was a triple homicide that went kind of cold called the Goddess Murders in 1989 on Halloween night that have to do with the history of the town, everything obviously. And they bring back up this comes back up with this girl who was, I don't want to give too much away, but sort of privy to the murders that now has the second sight and has grown up not really knowing about it. And they finally kind of bring this to a conclusion, and it's a really interesting book, and again, it's really beautifully written. This one was not, I read this one first. This one actually I didn't think was as good as her other one. I wouldn't say it's her first one, but it was before this one, and that was called The Lace Reader. The Lace Reader was, probably the best book I've ever written. Sorry. See, I'm getting tired. The best book that I have ever read with an unreliable narrator. She tells you at the very beginning of the book, because it's told from her point of view, and that character actually reappears in this one. But you could read this one alone, and it really wouldn't hurt you. Don't believe me, I lie all the time. And she does. But she's such an interesting character. The Lace Reader is about the women in her family, and had this ability to see the future in Ipswich lace, which is the only sort of hand bobbin lace that's ever really been made in the U.S. And so she has this weird ability to see the future and things like that. And it still didn't save her from a really horrific thing and a really horrific life. And it's about that. It's about kind of reclaiming that ability and reclaiming herself. And it was actually really good. So I recommend both of these. They were popular. I'm pretty sure your library's got them. So if your library is still open, maybe check there first. So the next one. This one's older, but it's kind of a perennial favorite. It's gone through, I don't know how many covers now. But it's called Sunshine by Robin McKinley. And it is, and I'm sorry, a dreaded vampire book. But you know what? It is so different from the average rehash of Dracula or god-awful Twilight or whatever. It's just refreshing. I liked McKinley as a child. I imagine a lot of you probably did too if you read these kinds of books. But Sunshine is definitely a step into being an adult, and it's about one of the most fascinating things about this book, I would say, is probably the world building. It's very different. It's very unique. We're asked to believe the premise that this took place after the wars with kind of the others. In this book, they're called the others, and that's anything that's not human. That's demons, vampires. They don't call them warlocks, but things like that, what have you. And there was this huge war, and it wiped out a lot. It's not post-apocalyptic. A lot of people make that mistake and like, oh, we're gonna put it in this category. This book kind of just defies categories. But so it's mainly told from the point of view of a girl called Ray Seddon. I say girl, she's probably in her 20s, maybe 30, if that. And Ray is a baker. She works at a bakery, and her favorite thing is basically she just wants to make cinnamon rolls and have a small, enjoyable life with her family and her boyfriend and all of that. And she goes out one night to the lake to get a little bit of peace, and she's kidnapped by others, vampires, and given as bait to this other person, who obviously turns out to be a vampire. I'm not really spoiling a whole lot with that. But what happens next is really interesting. It's kind of a Beauty and the Beast story, and kind of not. But there's a lot of interesting about the world. There's a lot of interest about Ray, because when you have these kind of stories, a lot of times the young person that's the main character is they have a small, boring life at the beginning, and then everything gets exciting and crazy, and they become a hero, and they really just want to be a hero, and they don't ever really want to go back to their normal life. And really, with Ray, it's the exact opposite. She's like, let's get through this and let's get out of this, because I just really want to go back to making cinnamon rolls. So this was excellent, and I recommend it to anyone, and I don't think anyone's ever taken me up on reading it, so I hope one of you do. My next one, I have a couple nonfiction thrown in here, but I think I'm going to do one of the nonfiction. This one I have out from the library for the next, God knows how long does the library close while I have it out. So it's closed for the epidemic, or I guess it's a pandemic now. But this one was really interesting. Quackery, a brief history of the worst ways to cure everything, and it's especially interesting right now. It kind of just talks about medical oddities through the ages and weird things that we as humans have done to feel better. Whether that's drinking radium, oh yeah, we did it. Purging, blood, vomit, excrement, all kinds of things. If you have a strong stomach, this is a really interesting look at it. And it's told in a light, kind of amusing prose, which kind of lightens up the subject matter. But it's just enjoyable. Like, I just had fun with it, and it's interesting to see where we've been as human beings in treating our illnesses and our sicknesses, and where we're going. Because, I really think a lot of our history tells us where we're going and gives us an idea of the crap we're willing to do to get there. This is definitely a, oh my god, why would you think that was okay? But at the time, plenty of people took cocaine for their cough. There's a meme that goes around the internet every once in a while that says something like old-timey medicine was basically you have ghosts in your blood and you should do cocaine about it, and that's kind of where this book comes in. It's not necessarily cocaine, but there's a lot of other interesting things that happen. So that one was good. Let's see, what else? Okay, we're gonna go with this one. I read this one probably right after it came out. And this one is especially hard to see because it's already got this pale light, and then I have my bright light on it. So anyway, it's called Weave a Circle Round. Again, I don't think I can pronounce the author, but it's by Carrie Marin, who knows? There's no umlauts, I don't know. But this was, I really have to say, reading this as an adult was a lot like being able to read as an adult for the first time, A Wrinkle in Time. It's that good, it's that amazing. It has to do with this preteen, 14, 15-year-old girl and her little sister, and she moves in with her stepfather and her deaf stepbrother, And all of a sudden, these two very weird people move in next door. One is called Quirva LaChance, and the other one is Josiah, and they're hysterical. They're very Mrs. Who and Mrs. Witch and Mrs. What's-It, if you are a fan of that as well. And Freddie, which is the girl, kind of gets sucked into these weird situations with these two. And it's about not being the chosen one, but getting pulled into a bad situation anyway. And it was exceptional. I think I devoured this in I don't know how long, a couple days. And it jumps around in history again, but it's just so enjoyable. It's so fun. I can't recommend that one enough. What else have we got here? Okay. We got a few more. And then, like I said, if this is something that you guys like, I'll do this again. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This one's amazing. I'm sure plenty of people have recommended it. As you can see, if you can read backwards, I don't know. It was a national bestseller. It's exceptional. It really is. Again, it's this beautiful, poetically told, artistically told story. It's very Tim Burton-y, which you can tell from the cover here. And it has to do with this fantastical circus set, I believe probably the late 1800s. But it never really gets specific with it. And it's the Circus of Dreams, and it is basically these two magicians have a bet against each other. They sort of like each other and sort of hate each other. It's hard to really decide which. And they both train their successor, these two, to make these different things be a magic in the circus. And it's a competition between the two of them to decide which is better. But of course, because it's a man and a woman, there are complications. Gorgeous book, absolutely wonderful. Can't recommend it enough. I read it multiple times. Okay. So we'll do this other nonfiction one that I have. If you know me, you know I read really weird historical stuff all the time. And I'm that weird person that comes up with random facts at the party, like, that creep everybody out. Really, like, oh, I don't know, how people made memento mori or whatever. My mom likes to tell the story where I was in preschool, I think, and one of the kids was out sick, and because they like to promote engagement, they asked us other children why they thought the other child was sick and what maybe was wrong with them. And the other kids said things like, oh, maybe he's got a tummy ache, or maybe he's got the sniffles. And I said, maybe he has diphtheria. And I really essentially haven't changed as a person since. So with that sort of disclaimer in front of this, she's got a couple of these now, and she has Sex with the King as well, but this one is Sex with the Queen, by Eleanor Herman. 900 Years of Vile Kings, Virile Lovers, and Passionate Politics. So this one is about basically people who had affairs with queens, European queens, pretty much all of them were. And it's just fascinating. It was considered almost déclassé for the king not to have a mistress, but if the queen had someone that she was having an extramarital affair with, that was just cause for all sorts of drama and horrors and disaster. There's a couple women in this book that your heart just breaks for. But it's fascinating, and it's written so interestingly. And again, it's another one that I just couldn't put down. There are these interesting women throughout history, people who you've probably heard of, like Anne Boleyn, and people who maybe you've never heard of before, such as where's one here? Okay, well, I don't have an example offhand because I could have done more research on this, and that sounded like too much effort. Not really, but there's probably ones in here that you haven't heard of, or at least ones that you haven't heard of in quite this way. And it's a really interesting book, and I really recommend both it and Sex with Kings. Sex with Kings talks about being the royal mistress and what that really was, because a lot of people make this assumption that it's just having sex with the king, and it's absolutely not all of that. You're supposed to be this force. Remember, you married a foreign-born princess who doesn't know you, doesn't know your customs, and maybe doesn't know your language. So the king's mistress was the real queen. She was the real heart of the court. But without the power of the queen or the security, really all she could do to keep her place was to keep the king happy. And so that's exhausting and complicated, and that one is a really good book too, about the women who throughout history who have done that. I have two more and then we're done. So this one is by Audrey Niffenegger. It is called Her Fearful Symmetry. You've probably heard of Audrey Niffenegger. If you haven't, you've been living under a rock. She wrote The Time Traveler's Wife, which was massively popular. It became a movie with Rachel McAdams. I don't like that one. I'm just not that big of a fan of it. This one, however, I adored. I went to college initially at the college where Audrey teaches. I didn't actually get to spend much time with her. I am under the belief that she doesn't actually exist. I'm kidding. I'm sure she does. But she's never where she's supposed to be. So she's a very interesting person in and of herself. And this book really reflects that. It's about these two twin girls that are the daughters of one of a set of twins. That gets complicated, but you'll get to it in the book. And they are expats from England. The mothers are English. Well, the mother is English, and their sister, their aunt, is English. And when their aunt dies of cancer, they inherit her flat or her apartment overlooking Highgate Cemetery. Highgate Cemetery, if you don't know, is one of the historical bastion cemeteries of London. And a lot of very famous people are buried there, and you can take tours there, and it's just this amazing place. And there's a lot of history about Highgate Cemetery that comes into the book. And wouldn't you know it, their aunt is a ghost in the apartment, and they learn to kind of talk to her, and she's got these, kind of this unsettled agenda, and this was just a really fascinating, artistic, and beautiful book. I highly recommend it, especially for anybody who's fans of ghosts, Gothic literature, or history in Highgate Cemetery. Alright, I have one more and then we're done for the night. I recommend this book to everyone. I've recommended it numerous times. It's been on my Facebook, it's been text messages to people, I've written lists with this book in it, but this one is probably one of my favorites. When I was in high school, my cousin bought me The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I had never read it. And I absolutely loved that book. This is the only book that I've ever found that has come anywhere close to being near Adam's level of brilliance. It's called The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. I didn't like the sequel, so I'm just going to say that right now. I wouldn't bother with the sequel. The Rook is, again, it's kind of like Sunshine in that it's difficult to categorize and difficult to explain, except to say that it's a lot like Douglas Adams. The Rook is not so much a person as a job title. It is kind of like MI6, but for kind of paranormal things, only not the kind of paranormal things you usually read about. There's no werewolves, there's no vampires, it's just these wholly weird kind of mutant powers that are amazing and very creative in and of themselves. And the Rook is a figure and a title. There's two of them, obviously, because it's based on chess, in this organization. And the Rook in question is Mythony Thomas. And you start the book from the point of view of a narrator who has no idea what's going on. This is someone who has been in some sort of battle or accident or something, because they wake up surrounded by bodies. And then they pull out this letter, and it turns out that the Rook was not the gifted magician sort of person that they expected her to be, but she's an amazing bureaucrat, and she's basically what has kept the entire foundation running. She's ridiculously organized, almost like she just knows what's going to happen before it's going to happen. And because of that level of organization, you can kind of assume that she is the Rook, but that has had her memory replaced, but it never really, erased completely, but it never really explains that. There are, however, letters for every contingency from the original Rook telling her, if you continue on this, I've set you up 2 identities. You can go back to being me, or you can disappear. If you choose to be me, you have to be aware that you have to be the Rook, that no one knows that you've been erased, and that someone's trying to kill you, because they succeeded in killing me, or getting me, or whatever it is. And that's the whole premise of the book, is these letters guiding the protagonist to be the Rook, and to uncover this plot, possibly from within the organization. Oh, and you do have a power that you don't know how to use, or anyway, the protagonist does. So this was fascinating. It was funny. It was clever. It was just perfect, and it was very British in its own way. And I absolutely can't recommend it enough. So those are my awesome books that I happened to grab off random shelves for this first video, and this went on almost a half an hour, so I really apologize if you don't watch all of it. That's more than fine. But I'm going to share this on my Facebook, and I think probably my Twitter, and yeah, tell me if this is good. Tell me if you want me to do more of this, so that you kind of have something to do during quarantine, and you can maybe find these books. I think you can get them on Kindle or Nook or whatever, maybe the library, maybe the digital book borrowing system through your library. Ask me questions, tell me books, whatever you want to do. Let's kind of start a dialogue here, because what else are we doing? Anyway, it's been really fun to shoot this video. I will try again later and hopefully do a shorter one. I didn't really expect myself to be quite this long-winded. But so we'll try again. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.